Hey guys, welcome to Bioactive Builds. First of all, I want to give a huge shout out to all my new subscribers. We blasted right by 13. I think we're over 30 now or something, but huge thank you to you guys. And if you like this content, drop a like or subscribe. I have a couple cool projects I have that I got some ideas for, so look out for those. Feel free to comment. I look at all the comments and the engagement. You guys are awesome, so I like that the most. Drop a comment, let me know what you think, have any questions. But today I'm going to be talking about my Crested Gecko Enclosure. This is actually the first bioactive enclosure I made, and it was the first reptile I had as well when I started this project. It kind of got me into this hobby. So I'll be talking about how I set this up and a couple of reasons why I think crested geckos are one of the best pets, especially for a beginner who wants to get into reptiles. So the first thing when you're looking to get a crested gecko, you want to choose a proper enclosure. They're arboreal, so they want something that's going to be taller. They really like a lot of hiding spaces. Something tall, arboreal, that you can really have some high plant growth and a lot of hiding spots. I really like this tank for a couple reasons. One, it has a couple inches to put substrate before you have the door. And also it has a front opening door, which is gonna be really helpful when you're feeding and maintenance, and especially when you're spraying down all the time. It does open from the top, but I really never use that. You can, and it has mesh on the top through ventilation, and it also has ventilation holes here. So you're going to want to make sure to have ventilation on the top and the bottom so it can cycle that air through. And it's really important because you're going to have this enclosure being really moist. So if you don't have that good ventilation, you will start to grow mold, something you really want to avoid. But it's really not a huge problem if you have this ventilation and you don't overwater. I've never had a problem with that. Another way that you can combat this mold is make sure that you have some springtails in there. I've got some red wigglers in here, which are like a worm, an earthworm. And they will go and kind of churn up the soil and make sure that it's all churned up and loose, basically. So the first thing you're going to want to do is set up your drainage layer and substrate. It's pretty basic. I put a drainage layer, something like lava rocks, anything that really is porous. And the drainage layer is really so you don't have the soil being completely drenched. The water can pass through and evaporate from the rocks. You don't want, because you're going to be needing to mist this a lot. They do need high humidity, so that drainage layer is very important. And on top of the drainage layer, you're going to need something like this. It's just a mesh. You can get this Zoom Ed terrarium substrate. It works just fine. But if you're going to be doing multiple enclosures, I would suggest getting something like this from a gardening supply store, Lowe's, Home Depot. Same sort of thing, but you're just going to get a better bang for your buck. I'm going to cut it to size and put it on top of that drainage layer, which should be about 1 to 2 inches thick. Once you have your drainage layer set up and you've cut the mesh to size, you're going to want to start putting on your substrate. So that's going to be pretty basic. You can use potting soil, eco earth, add some sphagnum moss, some dried leaves, bark in there. Don't use anything that has fertilizers, obviously. You want it to be naturalistic, and you don't have to go crazy with it. You know, the more you add, the more like a forest floor it can be, the more textures you can add, the better. But really, you're just going to need something that is soil, that can hold water, and can pass through that drainage layer. Once you've added the substrate layer, you're going to want to make sure that you have a place for food and water to go. So for me, I created a little ledge stand. You can buy these, but I made it out of styrofoam, and I put silicone on it and covered it with dirt. So and also put suction cups on the back so it can stick to the glass. That just, I think, makes it better than having a ceramic or plastic water bowl in there. I think it looks a lot nicer, and it's really easy to make. You just need styrofoam, cut it to size, silicone, and some dirt. Just use the same dirt that you use in the substrate. But really, once you have the water bowl, food dish, substrate, that's kind of all the requirements that you really need. The rest is just going to be you having fun designing the enclosure, making sure there's a lot of hiding spaces. And this is where you can kind of do things to your own liking. You can add different plants as you wish, make different hides. This tank came with a foam background, which is fine, but I just bought something that looked more natural, like a trunk of a tree, cut it to size and slap that in the back. It's not glued in or anything, it's just laying there. If you are gonna do that, I would suggest doing that before you add your substrate. For me, I didn't, so it's kind of just resting on here, but ideally you'd want it to go to the bottom so that the substrate is holding it back. I've also got a light here, which is on a timer for about 7 hours a day. Now the light is not required. Crested geckos don't have any specific light requirements. They don't need heating, they don't need UVB. The light is for the day-night cycle and the plants, but that's one of the best reasons about crested geckos. You don't have to worry about getting the right lighting requirements, how far away it is, are they getting enough UVB, checking the temperature. I used to have a humidity gauge in here to make sure the humidity is right, but I ended up taking that out because as long as you're misting it and you have the soil that is damp, you're really not going to have a problem with humidity. That's one of the things that's probably the easiest to control. Now when you get into lighting, you get into beardies and that sort of things, even turtles, the lighting, UVB bulbs and heating is going to be a lot more important. So that's one of the best things about Cresties is you can get a basic light that's for plants and you'd be ready to go. So I've had this tank for quite a while, so it's gone through a lot of iterations of having different plants in there. I'll throw up a few pictures of how it used to look and how I've changed it over time. But as you might be able to see, the drainage layer is kind of mixed with the soil. I mean, I've had these pothos in here, which you can see these green plants that are vining all around. That's actually one plant that I planted on the side, and it's just grown all around, and I've wrapped it around my different hides. It's attached to the back. It's great because it has these really long vines. It's great as attaching to the backdrop, and it's kind of easy to move, easy to grow. It's one of the best starter plants. You can't really go wrong. It's actually hard to kill. One thing to note with those pothos is that they do have really large root structures. So that's what happened to me, where the roots really grew through my mesh and disturbed the whole mesh layer. I still have a drainage layer at the bottom, but it's not really separated. Really, I haven't found too much of a problem with this. As long as I still have that drainage layer, even though it's kind of ruined with those roots, it still works, and I just make sure I don't oversaturate the soil. I kind of know the level of it, but if you were to take a hand clump of it, you'd want to squeeze it and it would stay in a ball but not drip water. So that's the kind of idea you want. And if you're missing it, you'll be able to easily achieve this. One thing I will mention is that if you have plants, you might need to water those specific areas of the roots that you have the plants because misting might not get it deep enough. So I will occasionally water those specific areas just so it gets deep into the root structure. Otherwise, I'm just missing the enclosure to keep up the humidity. I've also right now got a parlor palm in here. It's doing all right. I've had a bunch of other plants in here. Crested geckos, they can kind of dig around in the substrate, dig up your plants. So you might have some plants that just don't work, especially if you have in a certain location where they like to dig. I noticed that especially with my female when she's laying eggs, they're not fertilized, but she'll lay her eggs in the substrate, kind of nest on top of them, and that can kind of ruin whatever plants you have in there. So another good thing about these pothos is they have those big leaves, which make great hiding spots for the Crestie. You want them to feel safe in any location of the tank, up high, down low. They are nocturnal, so my Crestie usually hides in this arc, which I have silicone to the side, and I can see through in here. That's where she hides during the day. At night, she'll go all around. So I'll give you a little look inside my enclosure. I don't typically lock it because she really can't press these open and the light kind of goes over it to lock it, but it does have this little locking mechanism. So this is the food and water bowl I created. So these easily come out. I'll refill her food and water. Just put it back in here. This is just styrofoam that I put soil on top of, and then I glued this little piece of bark on it just to keep it kind of in line with the aesthetics of the rest of the tank. This is just a cork bark round that I put on the bottom. I've placed it against here so I can look through. I'm a huge fan of placing hides against the glass so you can check in without disturbing the animal. And this is a really cool thing that I did here. I mean, it's not hard to do. I just siliconed a piece of cork bark to the side. There's an opening here, the main opening here, and then if I go around to the side, this is a little hole I can check up on her. So it's kind of hard to see her in there. You can sort of see her outline. But really easy to do, looks awesome. Just put a little silicone on the side of the glass. It dries pretty quick. It stays there really well. And you know, you can get non-toxic silicone, obviously. And then I just have this wood background that's sort of like a tree trunk style. Again, I just replaced it with the styrofoam background that it came with. Now you can really see the root structure growing onto that background. It has a lot of grooves for it to get those roots nice and dug into it. And what I did is I just kind of wrapped it around here a few times, guided it, and it started, this pothos started right here. That's where all of these roots are coming from. It started right there. And honestly, I can't even tell you where the end of it now. I think it's maybe up here. It's kind of lost up in there. But you will notice that they will grow up towards the light. So if you want to kind of maneuver it and manipulate it, do it as it's growing. Once it's stuck up there, you're gonna, you could break the plant, which if you did, honestly, just replant that end and it would likely just reroot wherever you did it. So I have a few parlor palms here. These do okay. They kind of get trampled by the gecko sometime, but overall the enclosure is pretty basic, I would say, but it's one of my nicer looking enclosures. Really easy to set up. I love it because it just looks like a forest, forest wall kind of covered in vines. I added a little sticker here with the scientific name, which I think is kind of cool. And as you can see, these root structures really went crazy, kind of destroying my hard work on my drainage layer. The only thing I would suggest is when kind of designing your enclosure is to kind of have an emulation of the environment that they would naturally live in. So you're thinking high humidity, damp soil. You could add some mosses in here. You're gonna wanna replenish that water and the rapashi. I do it at night because that's when they eat. And it's really easy. It's one of the easiest enclosures that I have to maintain. And you can put as much work as you want to into it. This, I set it up and I let it kind of do its thing. I don't really mess with it all that much. And that's one of the reasons I think it's really great for a beginner or someone who kind of wants to get into the hobby and experiment with different ideas. As long as you have those couple basic requirements, you can go on and do the enclosure as you wish. So although it's not necessary to have a bioactive enclosure with a Cresty, they can be perfectly healthy and happy without one, but you do need something that will retain moisture, and bioactive soil really prevents that mold growth. And I just think it makes it a lot better for your plants and just the overall look of the enclosure as well. Another cool thing I think about bioactive enclosures is that they're always surprising me. So I had this enclosure for like a year and a half, and one night I found a discoid roach that was about this big in it. And somehow it had escaped me. I never saw it. I never put it in there. Maybe it was an egg in one of the plants or the soil I put in. They're fine. They're harmless to the Cresty. Now it's way too big for the Cresty to eat. And I've actually found out that there are 3 of them. So I have had these discoid roaches in here, never seen them. They grew probably from eggs or nymphs. And I was pretty shocked when I first saw it. They mainly hide behind here. I can see them right now. They're pretty freaky, to be honest. I've held them before. I'll throw up a clip of that. Let me just show you what I'm looking at the back of this enclosure here. So these are the 3 discoid roaches. I mean, those are not small by any means. They are, about the size of my pinky. So when I first saw that and I didn't exactly know what it was, kind of freaked out. I didn't put these in. These found their own way in. They hang out in the back during the day. They go under here, and at night they will be exploring the enclosure. Now, if they didn't hang out behind this wall during the day and they were disturbing my Cresty, I would take them out. But because they have this spot that they pretty much stay in all the time, except for at night, they'll come out a little bit. I'm fine with leaving them in there. My Cresty is not gonna attack them at all. They are just huge. So I'm not exactly sure how they got in there, but I'm keeping them. But really, I find that to be the best part of a bioactive enclosure. You're always finding something new. Sometimes I'll randomly have moths in here. Like I didn't put any waxworms in there, but I'll put some soil and maybe there's eggs. And there'll be a moth in there. It's really awesome to just see the enclosure developing through different stages as you learn, as it changes and you adapt to what you like. And there's certain things that won't work in a high humidity enclosure. Now, I learned that things will die away, and I've kind of stuck with a few plants that really work well, one of them being pothos. So if you want something that's really gonna grow and vine up the wall and you can manipulate it and wrap it around, this entire vine you see, all of that is one single pothos that I planted on the side. So that just goes to show you how great it is to use to give hiding spots and just fill out that enclosure, fill out that empty space. So in terms of feeding, if you get some rapashi or, this is a Zoo Med Cresty food, they can live on this. This is great for them. So this has, you know, insects in it, fruit, and this is a complete diet for them. I do supplement it with insects. My Crested will tongue feed superworms. But you don't want to overdo that, and you don't want to just give insects. They do need to have this in their diet as well. And with this, it's really easy. I just take a couple scoops of it. This lasts me like a year, I swear. Take a couple scoops, put it in my bowl, and mix around with some water to it's about a ketchup consistency. Sometimes I'll dip my finger in it, she'll lick it off my finger. Yeah, this stuff is great. You're gonna want that, and you can give insects for fun, you know, to supplement as needed. And you can also feed them fruit, like I'll give her bananas, things like that. But really, if you just wanna start out, you wanna make sure you're doing it right, get yourself Crested Gecko food, and supplement with insects. Another great thing about Crested Geckos, other than the fact that they're low maintenance, they're really friendly reptiles. And by this, I mean they're really not gonna bite you. If they do bite you, it wouldn't hurt, but you're not typically gonna have an aggressive Crested Gecko. If they're skittish, they'll try and get away from you, that's for sure, but they're not gonna be aggressive towards you. There's no risk of that, and they don't really mind being held. Now, they do have a semi-prehensile tail that they can drop, and if they do drop it, they will not grow it back. My Crested hasn't dropped her tail. I don't handle it that much. I do occasionally, but it's not uncommon for your Crested to drop your tail. So just know if it does, it's not something bad that you've done unless you were stressing it out. There's times where it might just drop its tail in the middle of the night. It'll take a few days for it to adjust, to jump and everything, but they can live just fine without their tail. So if that does happen, don't freak out. Now, I'm no expert on Cresties by no means, especially all the different morphs, but there are tons of different morphs, so it's something that you can really go deep into if you want to. I just have a basic one. I don't even know what kind of morph it is. I know it's a female because she has laid a few eggs, but she's really cool. They have awesome purple eyes with these vertical pupils, and they really look like a dinosaur. Now, if you do want to handle your Crestie, they're going to be jumpy, so just be prepared for that. They have really like sticky pads on the bottom of their feet. They're not really sticky. They've got these grooves in them, which helps them climb. It creates like a static friction on them. And when they're climbing on your hand, you can definitely feel that. So just be prepared for them to jump around, but they're really fun to handle and just great to interact with in general. And you don't have to do interaction with them. If you were to just fill up their food and their water and mist, make sure they have hiding spots, they will be perfectly happy. I find generally that they can be handled really easy. So this is something that would be good for a kid getting into reptiles, or you know, anyone who just wants a cool pet. Their scientific name is Coralophus ciliatus. They're also known as eyelash geckos because of the basically eyelash looking things they have on their eyes. And the cool thing about them is that they were thought to be extinct until about 1994, where they were rediscovered. And I think the story goes, there was a researcher and a Crestie fell from a light post onto it, and kind of that's how they got rediscovered. But it's just crazy to think that, you know, around the time a lot of us were alive, this creature was discovered, and now it's a huge hobby, and the hobby has helped bring it back. You know, and all kinds of morphs since then have been created. They can go for thousands of dollars. But I just find that really interesting that they were thought to be extinct until 1994, where they were rediscovered, and now they're one of the most common reptile pets that you'll see. Now, like most reptiles, they do shed. It's not uncommon for you not to see the shed because they will eat it, so maybe at night they will finish their whole shed and eat it, and you won't even know that they have shed. But a lot of times you'll see some shedding on the ground or stuck on them, so you can kind of know and follow their shedding progress. So if you have a female Crestie, they will lay eggs once they reach maturity. I've got a little piece of a eggshell here. I'll feed that to my roach colony. But they will lay eggs even if there's not a male in there. They won't be fertilized, but the Crestie will still protect them like they are. And what I found is that she lays them in the substrate, kind of by this rock. I've seen her do it at the front and the back a couple times. and then she'll nest on top of it and protect it. And that is the time where I've seen her be the most aggressive. I was trying to retrieve the egg, and she would kind of, open her mouth and flare up at me. She never struck, but she was protecting her babies. And so I left them in there, and then later, I kind of dug up this shell. Probably some bugs got into it, and it just decayed over time. But that's just something you do want to look out for. If you see your cresty kind of during the day in a spot that they're not normally at, if it is a female, she might be protecting some eggs. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you learned something. Make sure to subscribe, drop a comment if you want, and I'll see you guys in the next one.